Ever had a friend introduce you to something in the most random way possible? Maybe you notice them playing a random game on Discord, or catch them grabbing a DVD off the shelf, or maybe a random book out of a store. Let me tell you about one of the most recent experiences I had with this. Basically, I hopped on a Discord chat with one of my friends. Not naming his name, obviously, because duh. And he was just streaming all these snippets of these characters posing and transforming into different various forms. It looked vaguely familiar, so I asked him, "Yo, what is this?" And he replied,
"Oh, this? This is Kamen Rider."
Jesus, to be these cutting pieces like pizzas. When he grabbed the mic, these nuts said, "Please squeeze us."
Kamen Rider is a property that I'm genuinely surprised has never gotten super big in the West. I mean, Power Rangers got huge and this didn't? Well, I mean, they've adapted it twice, once with actual success and the other time...
You are a bad Fourze. From now on, you stay at home. Understand?
Let's just say Saban did not adapt it properly. And that's partly because of... Yeah, Toei. Yeah, there's not a lot of ways to get into Kamen Rider in the West, so you might have to use other websites? Hopefully I can at least start you on a journey into Kamen Rider. I'll also say I'm a bit of a newbie to the Kamen Rider franchise. I've only really finished 6 shows and I've caught a few episodes of a good few. But enough yapping. What even is Kamen Rider? Where the hell do I even begin with Kamen Rider? It's one of the biggest tokusatsu superhero franchises in Japan. Tokusatsu is basically a genre of Japanese filmmaking that is very special effects heavy. Think Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman, Super Sentai, which is adapted to make Power Rangers, and other stuff. There's generally like 2 genres of this, being the kaiju film and the superhero film or series, etc. I'd say Kamen Rider is probably one of, if not the most influential Japanese superhero. Like, the level of influence this series has is massive in Japan and even a lot of other Asian countries. Let me put it like this. Spider-Man is to America what Kamen Rider is to Japan, at least when it comes to levels of influence. Obviously, it's not a one-to-one analogy, but trust me, its level of influence is that similar. And trust me, there's a ton of Japanese and Eastern media that have Kamen Rider references and influences. Let me list off a few of the series just to prove my point. Dragon Ball, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Bleach, the Fate series, One Punch Man, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Fairly Odd Parents, TMNT 2012, The Amazing World of Gumball, Batman Incorporated, the comic, How I Met Your Mother. Man, F JoJo's reference, even JoJo referenced Kamen Rider. Now that I've told you all that, let's talk about who even made Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider was made by the manga author Shotaro Ishinomori, aka the King of Manga, who is pretty famous for creating Cyborg 009, Kakaider, Skullman, as well as Super Sentai, amongst other things. Look, Ishinomori is up there with like Osamu Tezuka, Go Nagai, Akira Toriyama as just one of the most influential manga artists and authors of all time. The only close Western comparisons I could even make to the dude is Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, or Bill Finger. In the early 1970s, Toei wanted some of that sweet superhero freshness like Ultraman had been getting in Japan for years. Thus, they approached this guy to help them create a series for them. And let's just say it paid off big time for them. From what I understand, the Kamen Rider series would run from 1971 until 1989, with some movies and other stuff after that, where it would take a break until the airing of Kamen Rider Kuga in 1999. And from then on, it's aired a new series every year. Kamen Rider split into multiple eras based on the current Japanese era the shows are aired in. Though I don't know enough about Japan historically or culturally to say why the eras have names like this. Though the eras that Kamen Rider goes follows as Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa. The Showa era, which goes from 1971 to 1989 for Kamen Rider, is sort of the classic or golden era for Kamen Rider. I haven't exactly watched any series from this era, but it seems like to be in line with other tokusatsu franchises of the time. The Heisei era goes from 1999 to 2018 for Kamen Rider. It's kind of the revival or silver age of the series. This is an interesting time because that's really when a lot of people who grew up on the older series would start to make their own Kamen Rider shows. This is also when the theming of the series would get a lot more out there, and also maybe a bit more mature and darker. Instead of relying on the classic grasshopper or bug themes, they go all out with themes like space, cars, ghosts, detectives, and many more. Reiwa, which started from 2019 until now, is the current era of the Kamen Rider franchise. It seems to have got a lot of ideas pulling from the Heisei era, but it's also doing a lot of its own thing. I've only really seen one show from this era, so I can't say too much on the theming and the tone overall, but it seems like these series may be a little bit more upbeat comparative to a lot of the Heisei offerings. I'll also say Kamen Rider tends to be a bit more mature, especially in comparison to a lot of its contemporaries being Super Sentai, Ultraman, etc. It leans a little bit more for an older audience for about that 10 and up range. I mean, some of the shows literally go over the horrors of war, self-identity, the pain of loss, and even guilt. Listen, if you think the show is going to be exclusively a dumb kid show, you'd be dead wrong. It does have its silly, campy moments, but there's also moments that genuinely have a heart and soul to them. Hell, there's even moments in the series that really made me reconsider just how deep you could get with a quote-unquote kid show. Now, let me ramble about the shows I've watched, huh? I want to clarify, these are just my recommendations based on what I've seen from the Kamen Rider series. I don't claim to be an aficionado of all the Kamen Rider series in the world. I'm mainly just talking about the series if you want a few recommendations on where to start. In reality, there's so many Kamen Rider series that a good rule of thumb is just to pick the one that looks either the coolest or fits your interests. But I also know that that could be hard for some people. With that being said, let's just talk about the few series I finished. W was the first Kamen Rider series I watched all the way through. I should also state that it's called Kamen Rider Double, which is literally written Kamen Rider W, like the letter. I think it's maybe a potato-potato thing, where it's either or. We're set in the windy city of Futo. We follow Shotaro and Philip, who are private detectives working in their agency called the Narumi Detective Office. Shotaro is a half-boiled detective, which means he always tries to come off as a hard-boiled detective type, yet is actually a big softy deep down. And there's Philip, who's a hyper-intelligent fellow who tends to hyper-fixate on everything when they're introduced to him. They're also both Kamen Rider W. Yep, the unique gimmick of this series is that there are actually two characters who are the main Kamen Rider of the series. I'd explain further, but I'd rather you figure that out for yourself. I'll say this is probably one of the more beginner-friendly Kamen Rider series. It toes the line between lighthearted and serious character moments incredibly well. It doesn't go into the too serious or dark territory like some of the later Kamen Rider series I'll mention, but that isn't a distraction at all. It takes the more traditional Monster of the Week formula like a lot of tokusatsu shows, but also knows when to string you along with threads and mysteries. I mean, the show is literally about detectives. This is one of the more popular Kamen Rider series in Japan. You can normally tell if a Kamen Rider series is popular in Japan if it gets a ton of merchandise, references in other media, as well as a ton of spin-off films and shows. I mean, this is one of the few series to actually get a follow-up manga, which was later adapted into an anime called Futo PI. Anyways, if there was any place I'd say for you to start, it might be here. Fourze was released 2 chapters after Kamen Rider W aired. In fact, it's sort of part of an odd number trilogy starting with W, double or 2, O's, it's written with 3 O's, and Fourze, because, 4. When we talk about Kamen Rider 5's, also 555, later it's not part of that same scheme. It came out way before that. Anyways, Fourze is interesting because it actually breaks away from a lot of the general norms of most Kamen Rider shows. For one, the main character is a high schooler. Yeah, that doesn't really happen in most Kamen Rider shows. Most Kamen Riders are young adults, usually around their mid-20s, maybe even early 30s. We follow Gentaro, who's just transferred to Amatagawa High, and he's just a wholesome little guy. He's very much the shonen manga stereotype of a dumb guy who's strong and just wants to make friends. We follow him as he creates the Kamen Rider Club with his friends Yuki and Kengo. There, they show an enthusiasm for space travel, as well as protect the school from monsters called Zodiarts. As you could probably tell from the clips and what I've been describing, this series is space-themed. And no, this is not my favorite Kamen Rider series out of the ones I finished. I may love space themes, but that doesn't mean I'll just love something because it has space in it. Though this series is a good time. It really captures the sense of hope for the future that you feel as a kid. Just wondering what it'd be like to see the stars one day. This series is nowhere near as popular as W in Japan, but it's pretty popular compared to other Kamen Rider series I've seen. I'd also say this is a pretty solid starting point, but not as good as W and what comes next. Kamenriderdeno released in 2007, 2 years before W. And this one is a wild ride. I guess I could describe the premise and aesthetic of the series to be trains, time travel, and possession by demons. Okay, yeah, that's a bit much. Let me just give you the premise. Ryotaro is a shy, cowardly guy with the worst luck in the world. It's heightened when he encounters a strange train pass that lets him travel onto a train that travels through time. Thus, now he has to defend his time, and all of time, from creatures called Imogen, who are essentially evil time genie demons. However, Ryotaro is not really good at fighting whatsoever. So, how does he accomplish this? By letting a good Imogen he makes a contract with possess his body when needed. Yeah, this series is really out there, but I like that. I enjoy time travel stories a lot, and this one takes it to a whole other level. It has a great explanation for all the different forms he takes throughout the series as well. This series is also really popular in Japan. To put in perspective, Live Door News once held a poll to see what Japan's favorite Kamen Rider series was, and Deno came out #1 on that poll. In fact, when I was researching this, it's always somewhere within the top 5 of most polls and rankings like this. The only other series that are consistently in the top 5 polls are like Fourze, W, O's, Kuga, and occasionally Build. Though for my research it seems Build might be more popular in the West than in Japan, but I don't know, I could just be my research. I'll also say that if W wasn't really working for you, try Deno instead. It's also a great first step into the Kamen Rider series. Kamen Rider Build was released in 2017 and is the second to last series in the Heisei era. And this might be my favorite Kamen Rider series, and maybe one of my favorite TV shows of all time. It's between this one and Fourze, and this series, it goes to some pretty dark places. Let me just give you the premise of this. 10 years before the story begins, astronauts landed on Mars and found an alien artifact we dubbed Pandora's Box. We didn't know what it did until it opened and created large walls that separated Japan into 3 places. These places became their own sovereign nations called Toto, Hokuto, and Seito. Here, we follow Sento, a scientist with amnesia and also a Kamen Rider. He's a vigilante who fights monsters called Smash and is considered a public menace. There's also Banjo, an ex-pro fighter who was framed for a murder he never even committed. They live and hide in Cafe Nashita with Misori and Soichi. Throughout the series, the 3 governments try to get power over each other and maybe even develop their own Kamen Riders. Yeah, this show gets pretty intense and political at points, and at times gives me a similar vibe to something like Metal Gear or Gundam. It's phenomenal with characters always switching sides or finding something new about themselves. I love this series, but I would not recommend it as your first time watching Kamen Rider. Maybe your second, third, or fourth show, but definitely not your first. Here's my other favorite Kamen Rider series, which also may be one of my favorite TV series of all time. Also, I know it's written as 555s, but in Japan it's pronounced Fourze. I'm pretty sure it's some sort of wordplay in Japanese for something, but I wouldn't know, I'm not Japanese. This one can get a bit dark. This series is very well beloved in Japan, though I wouldn't say to the same level as Deno or W. This series was released in 2004, and it's the 4th series in the Heisei era. Really? You guys just couldn't release it in 2005, huh? It would have made the most sense to release it then. We follow Takumi, a mysterious man with an even more mysterious past. He eventually bumps into Mari, who has gotten her hands on something called the Fourze gear, which she finds and, for some reason, cannot use. But somehow Takumi can. Now Mari, Takumi, and another friend, Keitaro, all work and live in a laundromat where they have found themselves entangled in the machinations of a major company called Smart Brain. We also learn about creatures called Orphnox, which are referred to as the next stage in human evolution. Though the validity of that claim is only said by Orphnox who see themselves as above humans from what I remember. Orphnox are created when a human dies and randomly revives as one, though some want to live and integrate with humans, while others see them as below themselves and only as a source of food. And yes, Orphnox live by eating the essence and life force of other humans. Now, they're all fighting over the ownership of the Kamen Rider gears. So yeah, this series can get quite dark, philosophical, and surprisingly introspective. It tends to take itself even more seriously than Build at times. The only series I'd say that has a similar feeling to this from my recollection is like maybe the X-Men series of comics. Even then, it's not a one-to-one comparison. I adore this series, and I'd say it's probably a suitable jumping on point, though maybe not as good as W or Deno. This is my least favorite show that I finished from the Kamen Rider series. Kiva was released in 2008. It has heavy gothic themes and usually incorporates elements of horror tropes with common tokusatsu tropes. The interesting thing about this series is we follow two separate points in time. One story follows Wataru in the year 2008. Wataru is a bit of a shut-in as well as a phenomenal violinist, though one day he wants to be as good as his father, who is said to be a generational talent. Wataru lives in what his community refers to as a haunted house, and it also turns out he's Kamen Rider Kiva. Kiva fights off creatures known as Fangires, who tend to attack humans and feed off them, but he must be wary of Kamen Rider Ixa, another Kamen Rider who destroys anyone they deem a threat to humanity, even if that is Kiva. In the other story, we follow Otoya in 1986. Otoya is Wataru's father and is a master violinist. He eventually encounters a beautiful woman and pursues her, in which he eventually gets involved in the organization Wonderful Blue Sky, which are a group of Fangire hunters. Of course, their most valuable agent is Kamen Rider Ixa. Usually the stories in 1986 tend to inform the actions of characters in the modern day, which at the time would be 2008. It's pretty interesting, though I can admit at times it could be a lot of information to digest all at once. It's not that it's bad, but it can be a bit much if you don't take time to really think about it. Overall, this series is not bad, though I doubt I'd be super engaged with it outside of the dual storylines and the gothic aesthetics, though that theme song is kick-ass. Overall, I wouldn't recommend this as a jumping on point, but I wouldn't say it's a bad one either. And that's all I got for the series I finished. Obviously, there's a lot of other shows that I haven't finished, but I've watched a good amount of. I tend to have a weird habit of picking up a show and then eventually dropping it for whatever reason. Not because I really disliked it, but because maybe I just wasn't fully interested at the time, or maybe I just wanted to pick up something else. I don't know, I'm not really a binger, so... I'm gonna clarify before I go over these shows, all these shows are great. I'm just the type who drops shows because I take breaks when watching a series, and sometimes that results in me dropping them. Also, I'm not really the type to binge a show, so that's probably another reason why. Mind you, I kind of like to digest the things I like to watch, and therefore I kind of take breaks in between to really understand what I'm watching. Anyways, with that clarification, let's get going to the shows that I've watched but not finished. Geats first started airing in 2022 and is the fourth series in the Reiwa era. This is also the only show from the Reiwa era I've watched, so let's make that clear first off. I've never finished this one, obviously, but this was the one I watched the most out of the ones I haven't finished. The best statement I can use to sell you on this is Kamen Rider meets Squid Game. Now, obviously it's not that simple, but let me just describe you the premise. We follow Ace Ukiyo, aka Kamen Rider Geats. He's playing in a game called the Desire Grand Prix. This is a game where the organizers around the game pull in people to become Kamen Riders and fight monsters called Yamato on their behalf. But of course, it can't be that simple. No, in this game, everything is set up like a series of challenges or games where everyone has two goals: win and survive. And if you win, you're allowed one wish of whatever you want. Or so it seems. Yeah, this series has a lot going on. It's pretty complex, yet also pretty straightforward to follow. And you follow a lot of Kamen Riders in the show, all of which are trying to achieve their own goals and wishes. There's sort of a lot of interworking relationships here. And trust me, when you think this show is going one way, it expertly finds a way to go somewhere else without making you sit there in complete whiplash. Also, this series is on Tubi, so it's free to watch in the States. I'd recommend it, even though it's not a more traditional Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider X8, released in 2016, is one of the last in the Heisei era. The best way I can describe this one is that video game doctors beat viruses in real life. Okay, yeah, that one is pretty weird. Let me elaborate real quick. Several years ago, the Bugster virus infected humanity and turned its victims into the monsters known as Bugsters. To combat this, the Japanese Ministry of Health worked with the gaming company GenCorp to form CR, a team of young doctors with the ability to transform into Kamen Riders that can effectively eliminate Bugsters. However, the CEO of GenCorp might have his own ulterior motives for something later on. Of what? We don't know. This is where we meet Emu Hojo, a doctor who is operating in Saito University Hospital. Emu is also a mythical gamer going under the tag of M. One day, he encounters a child infected with the Bugster virus and helps them by becoming Kamen Rider X8. And from then on, he fights the Bugsters along with other Kamen Riders to see if they can cure Bugsters all over the world. This one is very goofy, but it's fun. Yeah, of course it's a little cheesy, but if you can work through that, then I think you genuinely love it. I'd recommend it, might even be a great jumping on point, though I don't know. Had never finished it. Kamen Rider Ryuki was made in 2002 and is the third series in the Heisei era. Remember how I described Geats as Kamen Rider plus Squid Game? Then Ryuki is Kamen Rider Battle Royale, and let me just describe that a little bit further. There is a mirror world to ours that exists in reflections. In this mirror world, only Kamen Riders and monsters can exist. People can become Kamen Riders by forming contracts with the beasts inside the reflections. And when they form these contracts, they feed on the monsters they defeat in order to get stronger. There's also the Advent cards, which Kamen Riders use to transform and gain even more abilities. Yet, the creator of these cards only has one rule. There can only be one. When the final rider stands victorious, they get one wish. And this is where we're introduced to Ren Akiyama, the main character. He's an intern for an online news network called OOO Journal. People keep mysteriously disappearing all over the city and he's ready to investigate. This is when he inevitably gets way too deep and becomes Kamen Rider Ryuki, and he finds himself in the middle of something called the Kamen Rider War. But he doesn't care about the wish. He just wants to protect innocents from the damage. And if it takes winning the war, then he will. Yeah, as you can tell, this one's a little bit more nuanced as well. Again, it's kinda like Geats in the way that there's a lot of Kamen Riders you have to deal with and a lot of interlocking personalities, but hey, it's a good time. I never really finished this one, but I get the feeling that this might also be a great starting on point. But hey, again, I don't know. I never finished it. Kamen Rider OOO was produced in 2010, right between W and Fourze. I've only seen 4 to 5 episodes of this show, but I've been meaning to get back to it. I probably just wasn't in the Kamen Rider vibe when I was watching this one, and that's okay. Anyway, just let me give you the general premise. 800 years ago, creatures called greed, that's spelled with 3 E's mind you, were put to sleep. Now, in the modern age, they've awoken once more to wreak havoc on the world. Greed attack people and feed off their desires, sometimes even forming those desires into new greeds that attack people and cause even more pain. This is where we meet A.G. Hino, a man with a tragic past and no home. He's just traveling to wherever he's needed. All he needs is a pair of underwear for the next day and maybe a couple of coins. Here we also meet Ankh, a greed that hasn't fully formed yet, only being a floating arm. Eventually, A.G. meets Ankh and gets into a conflict with the greed. Thus, Ankh hands him a belt to transform into Kamen Rider OOO. After this, A.G. is introduced to the strange Kogami Foundation. Will A.G. survive his battles with the greed? Will he uncover the secrets of this organization? Will Ankh reform his body? I don't know, I never finished the damn show. And from what I understand, this series is really beloved by Kamen Rider fans all over the world. Personally, I never finished it and I should probably fix that, but I can clearly tell that this show's got quality stuff. I've also heard this is a phenomenal jumping on point. Hey, maybe you should give it a shot after this video. Gaim was released in 2013 and is one of the later Heisei era series. As you can probably see from the visuals, the aesthetics of the show are based on fruit and samurai. And honestly, that's not the weirdest thing Kamen Rider has done. I mean, you saw the video game guy. It's also interesting because this is one of the more mature Kamen Rider series. I know, looks can be very deceiving. The city of Zawame was once a bustling city. But ever since the Yggdrasil company moved in, it hasn't been the same. The Yggdrasil Corporation basically became the prime owner of the city, and thus made it feel like a castle town with everyone locked inside. This is where we find dance crews, groups of young people who dance to bring some kind of joy and entertainment to those in the city. These lock seeds contain creatures called Aims, who are rumored to be from another dimension or world. People have these Aims fight each other in small games of sport. Our main character, Kota Kazuraba, has just quit his dance crew, Team Gaim. He did this so he could financially support his sister, though one day, he suddenly finds himself in a strange dimension and grabs what's called a Sengoku driver. And now he can use the lock seeds to transform into Armored Rider Gaim. That's what they call them in the show, because, you know, they're armored. Now, suddenly Aims are appearing all over the place and attacking people. On top of that, Kota has to fight Aims as well as other riders that are appearing. And it gets even worse as it suddenly forms into a Sengoku-era conflict for the right to own a place called Helheim Forest and have the forbidden fruit. So yeah, you could say this is another Battle Royale style series, but it's a lot less straightforward than that. There's a lot of different ideologies and goals clashing at the time of this series. Is this a good jumping on point? I don't know, but I do know this is a really beloved Kamen Rider series as well. Just check it out. Go ahead. Shoot. Go check it out. And that's all I really gotta say. Kamen Rider's a great series, though Toei hasn't exactly made it easy to get into in the West. Luckily, there are some places you could catch it, like Tubi and Shout Factory and all that. Though, that's really it. There's probably a lot of places you could find fan subs, but not all fan subs are made equal. You could probably find a lot of them with a quick Google search. With that being said, please, go watch Kamen Rider.